So I wanted to run through the 4 operations of fractions. So these are the rules for the 4 operations, and they can be found on my website with a printout of the rules. So first I'm going to do addition and subtraction. Okay, so if I add and subtract fractions, I have to have common denominators. So let's say that I have 2/8 plus 1/4. I need a common denominator, and in this case it's going to be 8. Okay, I did not do anything to this fraction, so I don't have to change the numerator. However, I did multiply this one by 2, so I have to do that to the numerator. So 1 times 2 is 2. Now the rule for adding and subtracting is adding across the top and keeping the denominator. So I'm going to keep that denominator. I'm going to add 2 plus 2 and get 4. Now, the last rule for every operation is simplify. Every fraction needs to be simplified. So in this case, I'm going to divide by 4 because they have that in common. 4 divided by 4 is 1, and 8 divided by 4 is 2. So the answer to this addition problem is 1/2. Subtraction is the same way. We need to find a common denominator. We need to subtract across the top and keep the denominator. So let's try one of those. So let's say that I have 3/5, and I'm going to subtract 1/10. I need a common denominator. In this case, it's going to be 10. I'm not changing this one, so I can keep that numerator. However, I did change this one. 5 became 10 by multiplying by 2. So I have to do that to the numerator. 3 times 2 is 6. If I subtract across the top, I get 6, take away 1 is 5, and I keep my denominator. We need an extra step here because we have to simplify this fraction. 5 can go into both of these. So again, I get 5 divided by 5 is 1, and 10 divided by 5 is 2, and I got 1/2 again. So the rules are a little bit different whenever we do a multiplication problem. Multiplication means that we do not need a common denominator. So if I'm going to multiply 2/5 times 1/10, I multiply across the top and I multiply across the bottom. So I multiply my 2 numerators. 2 times 1 is 2. I multiply my 2 denominators. 5 times 10 is 50. I can simplify this by dividing by 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1. 50 divided by 2, you could think of this like 2 quarters. So if I had 2 quarters and I divided it in half, I would have 1/4. So half of 50 is 25. So I have 1/25. Now I'm going to keep this here because the rules for division are very similar to the rules for multiplication. When I divide, I flip the second fraction. Some of my students have learned to keep, switch, flip. And so that's what we're going to do for division. So let's say that I have 7/8 divided by 1/4. I'm going to flip this second fraction and change this to multiplication. So I have 7/8, and now instead I'm going to have times 4/1. 7 times 4 is 28. 8 times 1 is 8. And in this case, I have what's called a bobblehead. My students know these as bobbleheads. They're too heavy on top for the bottom. There are rules about that on my website too, so if you need to check out the video for the bobbleheads, or if you need to find the rules for the bobbleheads. But what it really amounts to is that I'm taking the top and dividing it by the bottom. So I'm taking 28 divided by 8, and 8 goes into 28 3 times, so I subtract 8 times 3 is 24. I get 4 down here. I rewrite my whole number, and I use this as my numerator, this is my denominator, and I have 3 4/8. This needs to be taken another step because I can reduce that fraction. So I get 1/2. So my answer is 3 1/2. So please check out my other videos that have to do with this. I have some on adding and subtracting fractions, and I also have some on changing improper fractions to mixed numbers.